What if the Israelites had never crossed the Red Sea? Picture this. The night air smells of salt and desperation. 2 million people stand at the edge of everything. Feet on the sand, backs to the most powerful army on earth, eyes fixed on a wall of black water that goes nowhere. Moses raises his staff. The wind picks up. The crowd leans forward. And then, nothing. The sea does not move. The waves do not split. The miracle doesn't come. Pharaoh's chariots roar closer with every heartbeat, and every prayer rising from 2 million throats crashes against a silent sky. What happens next will change everything. Or rather, it will keep everything exactly, brutally the same. Welcome to the world where the Red Sea never parted. But here's what nobody tells you. This wasn't just a missed escape route. This was the moment that would have cancelled the Bible as we know it. Cancelled 3 major world religions. Cancelled the very concept of divine liberation that billions of people still carry inside them today. One sea, one shore, one silence from the sky, and the entire spiritual architecture of human civilization collapses like a sandcastle at high tide. Stay with us, because what comes next is darker, stranger, and more consequential than you ever imagined. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at the word freedom the same way again. Let's set the stage properly, because context is everything here. By 1250 BCE, Egypt was the most powerful empire on the planet. The Pharaoh, likely Ramesses II, wasn't just a king. He was a living god. His word didn't bend. It didn't negotiate. It crushed. And for over 400 years, the Israelites had been the backbone of his empire's labor force, building cities, hauling stone, baking bricks under a sun that showed no mercy. They weren't just slaves. They were infrastructure. They were the engine that kept Egypt running. Now enter Moses, a man raised inside the palace walls with royal sandals on his feet and a complicated identity crisis burning in his chest. He'd already performed 10 plagues that brought Egypt to its knees, turning the Nile to blood, drowning the land in darkness, killing every firstborn son in a single devastating night. 10 warnings from a God who, according to the story, was done being patient. Pharaoh, magnificent in his stubbornness, had finally cracked. "Go," he said, and 2 million people walked out of 4 centuries of chains into the desert night. But then something shifted. Pharaoh woke up the next morning, looked at his empty labor camps, calculated the economic catastrophe he'd just signed off on, and did what powerful men have always done when they realized they gave away too much. He changed his mind. 600 elite chariots, the finest military force in the ancient world, thundering through the desert after people who had nowhere to run. And this is where our alternate timeline diverges from everything you know. In the biblical account, Moses stretches out his hand, the waters part, the people cross on dry land, the Egyptians follow, the sea closes, and history pivots. But in our world, the world we're exploring today, that hand goes up and the sea simply doesn't move. No east wind, no parted waters, no pillar of fire buying time. Just the sound of hooves on sand, getting louder. Just 2 million people realizing that the escape they were promised isn't coming. What does a people do in that moment? What do they become? That question is about to get a very uncomfortable answer. And if you want to find out what happens when the greatest liberation story in human history simply doesn't happen, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now, because we're only getting started. Subscribe to the channel. More alternate histories that will rewire your brain are dropping every week. Here's the cruelest part of this alternate scenario. And trust me, there are several candidates for that title. Moses had told these people something extraordinary. He hadn't just said, "I think we can make it." He had told them, with every ounce of conviction a man could carry, that the creator of the universe was personally invested in their freedom. He had stood in front of Pharaoh 10 times. He had watched plagues tear Egypt apart. He had seen things no human had any business seeing. And now, standing at the water's edge with an army closing in behind him, his staff raised to the sky. Silence. You want to talk about a crisis of faith? This is ground zero. This is where faith doesn't just waver. This is where it shatters into pieces small enough to blow away in the desert wind. The elders who had trusted Moses, who had convinced their families to pack everything and walk into the unknown, they're not quietly disappointed. They are furious. They are terrified, and they have about 30 minutes before Pharaoh's chariots make any further theological debate completely irrelevant. Now, here's where it gets genuinely fascinating from a historical standpoint. What actually happens to a liberation movement when the liberator fails? History gives us some uncomfortable answers. The crowd splits, and it splits fast. One faction, let's call them the pragmatists, immediately begins calculating survival. If they surrender now, loudly and dramatically enough, maybe Pharaoh spares most of them. After all, dead slaves build no pyramids. Economic logic is cold, but it tends to survive where idealism doesn't. The second faction, the ones who have nothing left to lose, which after 4 centuries of slavery is a surprisingly large group, considers fighting. Not because they think they can win against 600 iron chariots with farm tools and walking sticks, but because some forms of death feel better than others. And then there's the third group, the smallest, and in some ways the most interesting. The ones who look at Moses and wait. Not for a miracle anymore. That window appears to have closed, but for a plan, for something human, for the kind of leadership that doesn't depend on a sky that isn't answering. This group is about to become very important, but before any of these 3 groups can act on their instincts, the chariots arrive, and in the dust and chaos and screaming that follows, the short-term outcome is brutally simple. The Israelites are recaptured. Not all of them make it back alive. The escape attempt, the 10 plagues, the negotiations, the midnight march through the desert, becomes the most expensive slave revolt in Egyptian history, measured in Israelite lives. Moses is captured. The elders are made examples of. And Pharaoh, shaken but victorious, does what conquerors have always done with dangerous ideas. He tries to bury them under enough suffering that no one dares think them again. The question is, does it work? Can you actually bury an idea that has already given 2 million people a taste of what freedom feels like, even for just a few days? History has a very consistent answer to that question, and it is not the one Pharaoh is counting on. Here's something that doesn't get enough credit in standard history. Ideas that nearly made it are more dangerous than ideas that never tried at all. Pharaoh could chain bodies. He could not chain the memory of 10 plagues that brought his empire to its knees. He could not unring the bell of a god who, by every account these people carried in their hearts, had chosen them specifically. Even if the sea didn't part, especially because the sea didn't part, the theology doesn't simply evaporate, it mutates, it goes underground, and underground, it becomes something Pharaoh could never have anticipated: patient. Within a generation, the story of the almost crossing begins to transform in the retelling. The miracle didn't fail, it was delayed. The God of Israel wasn't absent, he was testing. The escape wasn't stopped, it was postponed. This kind of theological reinterpretation isn't unique to the Israelites. It's what every persecuted group does with their defining failure. They metabolize it. They turn the wound into a prophecy. And this particular wound, in this particular people, produces something remarkable: an inward theology. A God who doesn't require a temple, doesn't require territory, doesn't require political power to remain real. A God who lives in the story itself. Now here's where the butterfly effect starts getting genuinely strange. In our actual history, the Israelites reached Sinai and received the Torah, the Mosaic Law. Hundreds of specific commandments covering everything from diet to property disputes to the treatment of foreigners. It became the foundational legal document of Western civilization. But in our alternate timeline, still in Egypt, still under Pharaoh's thumb, that law never gets written down the way it did. Instead, it exists in oral fragments, in whispered traditions, in stories told after the overseers go to sleep. It is a faith built entirely on memory and suffering, which paradoxically makes it nearly indestructible. Meanwhile, Egypt itself is in an interesting position. The 10 plagues caused real, lasting damage. Agricultural cycles disrupted, firstborn sons dead across an entire nation, the economic and psychological cost of a failed reconquest of escaped slaves. None of that just disappears because Pharaoh won round 2. Egypt in this timeline is a wounded empire that has technically triumphed, but is quietly hemorrhaging. And wounded empires, as a rule, look for someone to blame. The Israelites, already marked as troublemakers, become the most convenient target available. This is where the darkness in our alternate timeline starts to concentrate into something very specific and very grim. The persecution that follows the failed crossing isn't the slow, bureaucratic oppression of the previous centuries. It's something sharper, something with a purpose behind it. Pharaoh's advisors, watching a slave population that somehow maintains its identity despite everything, begin asking a question that has echoed through the worst chapters of history ever since. What if the problem isn't the chains? What if the problem is the people? That question, once it gets asked out loud in a throne room, tends to produce catastrophic answers. And in this alternate Egypt, it's about to be answered in a way that will echo across millennia. Let's zoom out for a moment, because the implications of this alternate timeline reach far beyond Egypt's borders, and they reach forward in time with a force that should genuinely unsettle you. In our actual history, the Exodus story is not just one religious narrative among many. It is the root system of three of the world's largest religions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace fundamental aspects of their theology, their ethics, their understanding of history itself back to this single event. A people who were enslaved, who were delivered by divine intervention, who received a covenant, who wandered, who built a nation. Remove that event, and you don't just lose a story. You collapse an entire architecture of meaning that currently supports roughly 4 billion people's understanding of who God is and what God does. So what fills the void? This is where the alternate timeline gets philosophically vertiginous. The religious landscape of the ancient Near East without the Exodus is dominated by something we moderns find deeply uncomfortable: polytheism built on power. The gods of Egypt, of Babylon, of Canaan. These are not gods who choose the weak and vindicate the oppressed. These are gods who mirror the social order, who bless the powerful because the powerful are clearly doing something right, who demand sacrifice from the bottom and deliver reward at the top. It's a theology perfectly calibrated to make existing hierarchies feel eternal and divinely ordained. Monotheism, as it actually developed, was a revolutionary idea, and not in a metaphorical sense. The God of Israel was explicitly on the side of slaves against an empire. That is an astonishing theological claim. It means the universe has a moral direction. It means history is going somewhere. It means the oppressed have a legitimate cosmic complaint. That idea, that specific idea, shaped everything. It shaped the Roman Empire's eventual conversion to Christianity. It shaped Islam's radical egalitarianism in its founding period. It shaped the abolition movement. It shaped the civil rights movement. It shaped every moment in history when someone looked at a chain and said, "This is not how things are supposed to be." In our alternate timeline, without the Exodus, that idea either doesn't emerge or emerges so late and so weakened by its origins in captivity rather than triumph that it never achieves critical mass. The Greek philosophical tradition still develops. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle are unaffected by what happens to Israelite slaves in Egypt. But Greek philosophy, brilliant as it is, doesn't carry the same moral urgency about the dignity of every individual. It tends toward elitism. It is comfortable with slavery as a natural condition. Without a counter-tradition rooted in the experience of the enslaved, Western civilization's intellectual inheritance looks considerably colder. And here's the moment that should genuinely disturb you. The Roman Empire, in this alternate timeline, still rises, still conquers, still needs an ideology to hold an enormous multi-ethnic empire together. In our history, it eventually found Christianity, a faith built on an Exodus narrative, centered on a Jewish teacher, carrying the revolutionary moral freight of monotheism's covenant theology. In the alternate timeline, Rome needs something. It reaches for what's available, and what's available is a lot more comfortable with hierarchy, empire, and the divine right of the powerful to do whatever they want to, whoever they want. The Roman Empire without Christianity doesn't fall in the same way. It doesn't transform in the same way. And the Middle Ages that follow, if they can even be called that, are built on entirely different foundations. Whether those foundations are better or worse is the question that should keep you up at night. But let's come back to the Israelites themselves, because their story in this alternate timeline is not simply one of erasure. It's something more complicated, more human, and in its own dark way, more extraordinary. Peoples don't disappear easily. Culture is not a flame that goes out the moment you stop protecting it. It's more like a fire in wet wood, harder to start, nearly impossible to completely extinguish. Even under Pharaoh's intensified persecution, the Israelites persist, they adapt. And in adapting, they become something that neither they nor Pharaoh could have predicted. The first adaptation is linguistic. As generations pass, Hebrew, the language of the enslaved, absorbs Egyptian vocabulary, Egyptian cadence, Egyptian grammatical structures, until the line between the two becomes genuinely blurry. This is not assimilation, it's camouflage. The stories still get told, the traditions still get observed quietly in the darkness of cramped living quarters, in the spaces between work shifts, but they get told in a hybrid tongue that outsiders can't quite decode, that insiders recognize by its silences as much as its words. The second adaptation is religious, and this one is the most historically significant. Without Sinai, without the written Torah, without a territorial homeland to anchor the faith, Israelite religion in this timeline develops into something with no direct equivalent in our history, a kind of radical interiority. The divine is not in the temple, the divine is not in the land. The divine is in the act of remembering. Every Sabbath becomes not just a day of rest, but a subversive act of identity, maintenance. Every meal becomes a ritual of resistance. The religion becomes completely portable, completely hidden, completely immune to the one thing empires know how to do: destroy physical things. This, ironically, makes the Israelites of this alternate timeline more theologically sophisticated in certain ways than their counterparts in our history. They arrive at conclusions about the nature of God, transcendence, hiddenness, the divine absence that is somehow still present. That Jewish mysticism took centuries to develop in our timeline. They arrive there faster and harder because they had no other choice. Now here's the WTF moment that this alternate history delivers with full force. Somewhere around 500 BCE, roughly the period when, in our timeline, the Israelites were returning from the Babylonian exile and codifying their scriptures, something happens in this alternate Egypt that no one saw coming. A prophet emerges. Not a warrior, not a political leader, a poet, a thinker, someone who has spent a lifetime inside this underground tradition of radical interiority and has arrived at a theology so stripped of nationalism, so focused on universal justice, so rooted in the experience of the permanently dispossessed, that it sounds less like ancient religion and more like something that won't be independently discovered for another 2,000 years. This prophet, we don't know the name, because in this timeline there is no scripture to preserve it, begins teaching something that the authorities find far more threatening than any armed revolt: that every human being, regardless of origin, regardless of status, regardless of the empire's verdict on their worth, carries inside them something that cannot be owned, cannot be taxed, and cannot be killed. He is teaching the indestructibility of the person, and he is teaching it to slaves. The authorities, recognizing danger when they see it, move quickly. But the idea, as we have already established, is the most difficult thing in the world to kill. It has no walls to breach. It requires no army to defend it. It just waits. So here we are, 6 scenes deep into a world where the Red Sea never parted, and the picture we've assembled is simultaneously darker and stranger and more philosophically interesting than the simple counterfactual it started as. Let's pull it all together, because this alternate history has a conclusion that lands like a fist. In this timeline, Egypt remains the dominant power for longer. The Israelites remain enslaved, but evolve a theology of interiority so sophisticated it anticipates by centuries ideas that took the rest of the world millennia to reach. Monotheism still emerges, slower, harder, more wounded, without the triumphant narrative of national liberation to anchor it. The religious landscape of the Mediterranean world is profoundly different. Rome, without Christianity, builds its imperial ideology on foundations that are considerably less interested in the dignity of the individual. The concept of universal human rights, which we treat as obvious and ancient, but which is in fact a very specific cultural achievement, is either delayed by centuries or takes a form so different it's barely recognizable. And here's the part where the alternate history bites back at the real one. All of that, every single one of those consequences, hinged on whether a body of water moved or not on a single night in the Bronze Age. One event, one night, one moment where the impossible either happened or it didn't. The entire moral architecture of Western civilization balanced on a shoreline. Now here's the question that this exercise is actually asking, underneath all the historical speculation. What does it mean that the most transformative idea in human history, that every person has inherent dignity, that the universe bends toward justice, that the powerful do not have the final word? What does it mean that this idea was born not in a palace, not in a philosophy school, not in a center of power, but on the wrong side of the most heavily armed army in the ancient world, at the edge of a sea, in the middle of the night, among people who had nothing? The sea parted in our timeline. Whether you read that as miracle, as metaphor, or as history, the effect is the same. It produced a story, and the story produced an idea, and the idea produced, after enormous amounts of suffering, backsliding, betrayal, and remarkable human stubbornness, the very vocabulary that allows us to even ask whether slavery is wrong. That vocabulary didn't come from the powerful. It never does. It came from people standing at the edge of the water with nowhere to go. In our alternate timeline, those people find another way. Slower, darker, more costly, because that's what people do. The idea refuses to die because the need for it is too deep. History keeps delivering the same punchline. You can chain the body. You can silence the voice. You can burn the text. But you cannot kill the moment someone first understood that they were worth more than what the empire said they were. That moment, once it exists, is indestructible. The Red Sea, in the end, was just a dramatic stage effect. The real miracle was always the people standing in front of it, refusing to accept that the water was the final word. And that stubborn, unreasonable, historically consequential refusal is the most human thing that has ever happened on this planet. The sea didn't part in this timeline, but the idea crossed anyway, and that should tell you everything.